Thanks for coming. This is the first session of today, so I really appreciate you taking that extra effort to come in early. This will be a talk about Sandbox CI/CD environments for everyone. My name is lmakarov. I'm the chief architect at FFW, and I'm also the Docksal project lead and one of the maintainers. So this is what I would like to cover today. Quick agenda, quick introductions, just recap of what a typical development process looks like today for an agency or a team, or what it should look like, how our local environments look like today. I still assume that there are very different approaches that people are using, but it all goes towards using Docker in most cases. Project Illuminated, which I personally think is the most important aspect of the whole DevOps process that you may ever have. So this is a really important point to consider when you are working on your DevOps process and in general, the way your team is working and onboarding new members. Sandbox environments with Docksal, how we use them, how we use Docksal at FFW for CI/CD environments, and how you can use them as well. A few people already figured this out in the community, and we finally formalized it in a way that everyone can use them now, and it's super easy. At least that's our goal, to make it as easy and simple as possible to be able to start using sandboxes if you're already using Docksal for your local environments. And the last bullet point, advanced and cool features. This is probably the most exciting part of the talk, so I'll try to get to there not as quickly as possible, but I'll try to leave enough time to talk about that stuff. So again, hi there. This is me. I think I already introduced myself. So I'm a chief architect at FFW. Recently I've been mostly working and focusing on our internal processes and tools, infrastructure, and DevOps, how we do things, how we automate things, how we onboard people, how we make our process as efficient as possible using automation whenever and wherever possible. I've been working with Drupal for over a decade, and I started Docksal over 2 years ago out of a frustration that I had with the state of things. My dev desktop just decided not to start one day, and did you reboot didn't help. I rebooted multiple times, I reinstalled it, something just got messed up really badly. So that's when I started looking into other options, and at first it was Vagrant, and then a few months later, when Docker was my third attempt actually to use Docker, the third attempt succeeded. So that's when Docksal was born, and that's when we started working more and more on it internally, and eventually we open sourced it. I'm not the only one working on Docksal. This is the team of the official team of maintainers. As you can see, it's supported right now by a few companies: FFW, EPAM Systems, and Canopy Studios. So thanks to these guys and agencies that dedicate time to work in Docksal. Now, the reason I included this slide, it was not originally in my slides, is because it's important to understand what our typical development process looks like today. And it's really basic stuff that should probably be basic stuff that everyone is aware of, but it's important to understand where the sandboxes fit in here in this process and why they are important. So usually we work on local and develop features in feature branches, then we submit pull requests. And then team leads or whoever does code reviews goes in your GitHub, GitLab, Bitbucket, whatever you're using for code reviews, and does a code review. But that's just looking at the code. In lots of cases, when you have Drupal generating features or configuration for Drupal 8, you're looking into a matrix. So maybe you can read the matrix, but I personally cannot. I prefer to be able to have a real thing that I can actually see how it works and what it does. So in certain cases, if you have smaller changes, it's really easy to review them and improve. In other cases, you really need to be able to do some smoke testing, or at least see how it performs. So traditionally, what you would do, you would just pull the feature branch locally and spin it up locally, and then do the review. And if you are satisfied with that, you approve the pull request, or you submit your review and request some changes. So, and then the pull request is approved, and you should, if you don't have the automation in place, to then deploy things to your dev, to staging, to production. And hosting is kind of outside of this picture, because I'm assuming that you're using some kind of hosting provider that is Drupal friendly, like the BIG-3 guys or other guys as well who are coming onto the scene. And sandboxes fit exactly where we have the code review. Plus, this is how it started for us. So I really needed a way to be able to not have the changes pulled down on my local, spend time provisioning the environment to take a look at it. I wanted it to be done for me as the pull request is submitted, or as a feature branch is actually pushed into Git. So that's where the CI/CD kicks in, and it can build you that environment. So do the work for you, and all you have to do is just click on the link, go in and review it there. It's already there for you, sitting, waiting when you can review it. So again, just a quick step back. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Slides will be available. So quick question: who's still using Vagrant in the room? I'm not going to blame you for that. Just asking. Who's using Docker? I mean, who's not using anything, and you're just here to listen to this talk? Okay. Well, so most people in the room raise their hands, and they're using Docker, which is great. I'm not going to too much to advocate towards using one tool or the other. It is just important that you use Docker, and you probably know why you made this decision. But I do have slides why Docker is changing the game, and why we're all switching to that. And there are so many tools that are now using Docker as their engine. So again, the old good issue of cannot reproduce on my local. There were multiple approaches to solving that. Vagrant was one of the first ones, which was kind of trying to make things consistent. But you end up with monolithic virtual machines. You end up with provisioning all the time, which tends to break, and then people just spend days or weeks trying to fix it. So not really good experience. So that's when we started switching to Docker, because Docker offers immutable container images. You pull the image, and it's always the same. It's exactly the same for everyone. It's the same for you, for me, for you, and then in our continuous integration environments, it's also the same. So we get this consistency across the board, which is great. And images are tiny. They serve microservices. So we don't have a monolithic VM. We have specific services which we can plug in as Legos, which is also really powerful. So again, this is all of the why Docker bullet points. I'm going to skip through those. You can take a look at the slides to just remind yourself why you are doing this. So Docksal is one of the local dev tools available, along with Lambda and DDEV, probably the three most popular tools. People tend to I hear a lot of questions. Well, which one is better? How do they compare? So it's really a matter of preference. And I heard someone saying during the DevOps Summit earlier this week that we didn't have fights over which IDE we use, so we shouldn't probably have fights around what development environment we're using locally. So it's a matter of preference. Try it out, see whichever works for you. I would personally say that Docksal is my favorite, and I will give you a reason why using Docksal as your local dev environment will actually help you with your pull request environments a lot, and it will be a really seamless and easy transition. So comparing the three, Docksal is probably meaning Docksal and .dev. Docksal is probably the least, it adds the least amount of wrapping and abstraction around Docker itself. So it's not bare bones Docker and Docker Compose. There are lots of things that we handle for you, but it's also as close to native Docker Compose YAML as it probably gets. So there is no additional thing that you need to learn. And if you are familiar with Docker Compose, Docksal would feel quite natural to you. So yeah, no new stuff to learn in terms of using Docker Compose and YAML there. You can extend services with your own stuff, so it should be pretty straightforward. Again, about Docksal, we have a library of pre-built images that you can use. You can extend with your own. We have a lot of starter projects that can be used to start your Drupal or WordPress or anything else project that you want to work on. And Docksal is also extremely flexible, so you can change lots of things. You can write custom commands, you can extend our stock images with a Docker file, and you don't even have to commit this Docker image, your custom one, into a repo. It will be built for you locally, it will exist there, and provisioning happens only one time. So once you need to reprovision your project Docker because of the caching mechanism in the file system that it's using, it will just reuse what it already did. So if there were some packages that needed to be installed, it will just take that layer where it happened from cache. It doesn't happen like with Vagrant, it will happen over and over and over again. Well, maybe with Ansible it was smarter, but still. Now, at this point, let's consider the local dev environment's issue is solved. We are on Docker, Docksal, any other option, but that only provides us the stack. We still have our application somewhere, and the stack is an empty bottle. You need to fill it with your application. So project automation is a really big thing. And this is how we handle it in Docksal. So there is a canonical command, which we call init, and what we assume is that this is the only thing you need to know or run when you want to provision your site from ground zero to a completely working, functional local dev environment. And if that's not the case, because I've seen people having an init command and then instructions for the repo for the project say, well, run fininit, and then there is a bunch of other steps that you have to do, and maybe run fininit with parameters. That is not the way it was intended to be. This should be the only command that you run in order to create containers, initialize settings for the project, pull down the database, run database updates, clear caches. So anything that you would normally write into your wiki or readme instructions for the project, don't write it there. Write it in the script. So if it can be done manually in the console, it should probably be done in a script, so people don't have to do this manually. And Docksal comes, like, init is not the only command that you can use. Docksal allows you to use any custom command that you want. It doesn't have to be bash, it can be any interpreter, any language that you want to use. In most cases, bash is the most efficient way to do these things. It's also the least verbose, so scripts are smaller, they are easier to read, they are easier to manage. But you can use like robo files, you can use anything else that you feel comfortable with to create these commands. But in most cases, they will be simple or more advanced bash scripts. So things like importing the database, running database updates, building theme, running behat tests, anything else you can imagine, put them into these individual commands that can be reused and run whenever there is a need for them. And you can use these commands inside of the init command. So if there is, if you pull down the database from your hosting provider, you run database updates, clear cache, you can reuse the commands, those individual commands in your big, like initial init commands that is going to run them in a specific sequence to then provision the site. But the most important thing is that this one should be the only thing that your developers have to run in order to be able to provision the site from zero to a completely working site. Now, once we have this automation in place, and this is why it's so important, when everything is automated, you can reuse this automation in your continuous integration, which is completely headless, unattended, no one is there, and it's just machines doing their own stuff. So once provisioning of your site is automated, you can use that provisioning the same way you use it locally in a continuous integration environment. Because we use Docker, we use containers, containers are portable, they run the same exact way anywhere they can run, anywhere there is a Linux kernel, or a virtualized Linux kernel. So I briefly touched this in the beginning. What are sandboxes for? Enhanced code review is probably the biggest thing. It allows team leads or anyone doing code reviews actually looking over the application, not just the code, but how that code performs in the real life. You can run automated tests. So before you merge changes in, before you run it, maybe you have your tests running on your integration environment, which is usually the develop branch, if you're using Git flow. Before you merge that in, you are able to run automated tests against your sandbox environment. So your feature branch, the environment for that is provisioned, and you can run the automation against that. Catch regressions early on, run your behat tests, run your visual regression tests, run whatever else tests you have on that specific feature branch. This is really powerful as well. And it doesn't stop there. You can do manual testing. You can have your QA team do testing against that specific feature branch provisioned for them to review before it's done, when everything is in one bucket and it's not clear what actually caused the problem. Because having feature branches and testing against feature branches allows you to catch problems really early on. And another use case that I've seen a few times, client demos. So you may want to have client access to a specific version of your application, but not the staging environment. So maybe you want to give them a preview of a specific feature you're working on, and it's like a big feature and you're working on it for a long time, and you cannot really deploy it on a staging environment because they do UAT for another release, and you just need an extra environment where that can happen. So how does this work, and what do you need for sandboxes? You obviously need your Git repo. You need your code base, and as I mentioned previously, this is where it starts to be more Docksal specific, and why using Docksal for your local development helps you run it for the sandbox environments. Because once you have that all in place, once you have the finite commands in place, and it runs everything is provisioned automatically, you can now apply the same thing in sandboxes. So your code base with Docksal, you need some kind of CI solution. So internally we're using Bitbucket pipelines and also CircleCl. What is good about CircleCl is that it works with both Bitbucket and GitHub. It has a free tier, though if you are an agency, I would highly recommend just paying those $50 or whatever dollars to get an extra container and run unlimited minutes of build time. CircleCl is Docker-based, so that's an important thing. In theory, any Docker-based CI solution will work, though officially we support Bitbucket pipelines, CircleCl, and GitLab CI. Adding other integration is not a big deal. No one just asked about it. And then the third thing you need is the sandbox server. So you may ask, why do you need a separate server? Well, because the thing in the middle, the CI, it only runs during your build time. So when build, it's not supposed to exist forever. It runs the build, it runs automated tests, maybe, usually doing like static code analysis, but it does not allow you to spin up an entire site. It doesn't give access to that site. So in certain cases, like CircleCl thing and Bitbucket pipelines will allow you to run extra containers, so you can maybe run behat kind of under this umbrella, but you will not be able to access it from outside, so it's unusable for code reviews or manual testing or any more advanced testing when you need an external tool to access this environment. So that's why you need a separate server where these environments will provision and exist for a certain time until they abandoned, expired, and eventually removed. This is the diagram how it works. So you have your version control system on the left, the 3 that we support officially. Adding support for another one should not be a big deal. The CI piece in the middle. So GitLab has its own, Bitbucket has its own, and then Circle, since GitHub is quite not there yet, though they announced that they will support soon the actions, which will be basically the GitHub pipelines, though they had to call it something else because they are too late to this stage. So Circle supports both GitHub and Bitbucket, so we internally use Circle with either options, and Bitbucket with Bitbucket, and GitLab with GitLab. And then there is the Docksal CI agent. This is the container that actually sets up the build and talks to the Sandbox server to provision it there. So this is the bridge between your CI and where the environments will be hosted. Back to the idea of everything should be automated. These are the only 2 commands that should get your developers or your CI environment from nothing to a fully working site. Clone the repo, maybe change the branch, thin it, and everything goes up and running. You will also need SSH access to the repo and to the server is important. I'll cover it a little later. Now the Sandbox server setup. So we try to make this as streamlined as possible, and right now we support AWS and Google Cloud Platform. I know people will probably ask about DigitalOcean or something else, which may be a much cheaper option, but these guys provide tools to make it super easy to provision servers and infrastructure. So with AWS, we have a CloudFormation template, which makes it super easy. You basically just click a button, and assuming you have your account setup, billing setup, you have an SSH key loaded there, just a few clicks, and then in a few minutes you get your server, Docksal Sandbox server, fully provisioned. And I will demo this part, so there will be a live demo. Google Cloud Platform is a little more involved. They don't have the same level of kind of automation around provisioning things. They have a feature or product tool called Deployment Manager, and we have a template for that. You still have to use console in order to provision a deployment manager template. What they provide though is a cloud console, so you don't have to run it locally. You basically click another button, it loads you with a cloud shell, checks out the code base for this thing, and then in the instructions we have a few commands that you run to start up the whole provisioning of the infrastructure. So that's what it looks like. In the Docksal Sandbox server repo, there are instructions and a button that you click, and that starts up the provisioning. When it's completed, this is what you will see. I don't know, is anyone familiar here with CloudFormation? Okay, so you don't have to be. We try to make it as simple as possible, so click the button, let it do its thing, and then at the bottom you will see it tells you what is the public IP address and the default URL if you didn't assign any domain to this that you can use. And that's basically your server. So with the server in place, you now need the CI piece to know how to provision an environment there and how to connect to the server. So there are 2 things. Specifically, this is about CircleCl. I use it as an example. It has a free tier, so it's really easy to start working with it, and I encourage you to try it out. You need a config.yml for CircleCl, and there are a few things here, but really it's just the setup, kind of telling it which Docker image to use for the agent that is going to control the actual build process. Some configuration for the agent, injecting variables for the build. Checkout is an internal instruction for CircleCl to check out the code base. And then the sandboxing is a script inside of the CI agent that knows how and where to provision the environment for this project and branch on the Sandbox server. So really it all boils down to that single command that you have to run. Everything else is kind of a header that you will have it all the time when you work with CircleCl. The second thing that you need, so the first thing is the project level configuration. Yeah, this is not config.yml, there is a typo. The first thing was config.yml in your project's code base, which tells CircleCl which steps to perform to run your automation. And then the second thing is setting up, telling CircleCl where your Sandbox server is and how to access it. So in the CircleCl project settings, and it's the same for GitLab and Bitbucket, you would have environment variables at the project level or maybe at the organization level, so you can configure it also for all projects in your organization. The two things that are required is the Docksal host, so that tells your CI where the server is, and then the SSH key is what is the key to access it. It's a base 64 encrypted string, so you basically just encode your private key with base 64 command and paste it there. The last thing, GitHub token is optional. It may be GitHub token, it may be Bitbucket token, and we're working on getting GitLab integrated as well. This will allow the agents to post back updates, build status updates to your repo. So you can see the build is running, the build finished, and here's your Sandbox URL. Live demo. Okay. Well, so as I promised, this is the repo for the Sandbox server, and we have instructions there. Let me bump it a little. We have instructions there for Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud Platform. I'm going to use AWS because this one is the most streamlined approach with CloudFormation. So click the button. It loads up the CloudFormation. This is the template that is stored on S3. You can view it in the Visual Designer, though it's not very complex. So you just click Next. Here you select what you want it to be called. I already have one called Docksal Sandbox Server, so I will just add it to there. So it is tiny, but just trust me, what I'm telling you is there. You select the instance size. So the minimal I would recommend to go with 2 GB of RAM, which is Tier 3 small, but you can use anything in the list from here. Then SSH key, you should have preloaded SSH keys in your AWS accounts, and then you basically select the one that will be used to access the server. The rest is optional. So we'll skip through that, so really give it a name, select the instance type, select the SSH key. Next, and create. So this is the one I had there previously. This is the new one that is provisioning. It is going to take about 2 to 5 minutes to provision this thing, and in the end, in the outputs, we'll see the IP address and the URL that we can use. The same way for this one that I already have running. So we'll get back to this when it's provisioned, and let's continue with the presentation in the meantime. Oh yeah, and I do encourage you to dump this yourself. It should be super easy and work right away. I mentioned this, the Docksal CI agent can post back build status notifications. So far we support posting back to Slack, GitHub, and Bitbucket. And this is what it looks like in Bitbucket. So when your Sandbox is, well, you've probably seen this because this is how other CIs integrate. They post updates for when the build is running, when the build is finished, when the build failed. You will see the updates there. So what we do, we also post an update, and you will see the progress, ongoing, failed, or succeeded, and then the details is basically the URL to the Sandbox environment that was provisioned. So you can get it either from the build logs or from here, which is super easy and straightforward for most people. And when you open the URL, well, I used the Docksal Drupal 8 boilerplate project, which has a branch for CircleCl integration. It's not yet merged mainstream. I keep it separate for now. But you can reuse the configuration setup there, and this is basically what it provisions. So it's in this case it's a bare bones Drupal 8 site, but just proves the point. And I can actually show you that exact thing running in here. So this was the previous build. Oh, and you will see one of the cool features that I will be talking about later on. This environment, since I was not using it for more than half an hour, it went to hibernate. So it was not using server resources, and what you saw just now was that environment waking up. So when I requested the environment, it took a few seconds to process the request, wake up the containers, bring the environment up, and here I am. In half an hour, if I'm not making any requests to this environment, it will go back to sleep, so it's not using any server resources, which is an extremely cool feature, and I will be talking a bit about this and other cool features later on. So let's get, in the meantime, CloudFormation did its thing. So this is the IP, this is the URL. So since I have not configured any certs or any domain, I get this browser warning. So this is the default screen you get when there is nothing, like the VHOS proxy doesn't know what you wanted it to do, so there is no project URL basically, so something like Drupal dot and this thing. So it's just an empty server, and that's what you will see when the server is empty. If I log into the server, or if I connect it to CI and have the a sandbox provisions, I will get something like you see here on the previous server that I had already up. Okay, well, cool features. We have about 10 or so minutes for the cool features, so hope you enjoy this. What you saw just a minute ago was, I call it smart resource management, and this allows, so when we first started using this, we realized, well, since containers are quite heavy compared to the ways this was done in the past, where you have just a shared doc root and maybe like a single stack, and then multiple virtual hosts where you would run your sandboxes, containers are heavier than that for sure. So each stack would require maybe at least half a gig of RAM based on how heavy your project is. So they are memory hungry. That is true. So if you just start provisioning sandboxes on the server, you will really quickly run out of memory. So in order to solve this, we added two features. Well, we started with automatic hibernation. So what we do, we check the logs for the web server container, and if there is nothing within a configurable time period, we shut down the stack. So we assume you no longer need it, and we shut it down. It's not using any resources at this point besides just the disk space for the project and container images, which I actually reused across projects anyway. Well, okay, well, now it's down, that is good. What if someone wants to use it again? Do we want them to go and click a button to start the stack? Well, yeah, that's what we started with, but that was not cool. So what we did, we figured out a way to wake up those environments on demand. So when a request comes in, Nginx, basically through some Lua scripting, starts that specific environment that you wanted to access, as long as it finds it on the server, and it brings it up. Takes about 5 seconds, and you saw it in action, basically. And then for environments that are not being accessed for an extended period of time, which is configurable as well, they will be wiped out from the server. So the code base, the database and the container, everything is wiped out, so it doesn't take disk space. At FFW, we configure this, and with Docksal sandboxes, by default it's configured to half an hour to consider the environment inactive, and then 7 days, I believe, to consider dangling, at which point we wipe it out. One day I got a request, and then it started to repeat about, well, we want to sandboxes not really be sandboxes, but more like permanent environments, like dev and stage. Well, that was not the point of sandboxes. They are not supposed to be that, but we actually added that feature as well. So you can, in fact, now have permanent environments for your branches. Like you can have your develop deployed to like a sandbox environment which will not be wiped out after those 7 days of inactivity. It will still go to sleep, but it's still there. So you can keep changes there. You can have your content editors doing something there, and it will stay there. So you can have as many as you want. Since they also go to sleep, they don't really use extra resources. It's just the disk space that will be consumed. So resource constraints, so that you understand how that works. Active environments use RAM. Environments that are hibernating, they only use disk space. They don't use RAM. Active obviously use both. Security features. So you've seen that there was no sort installed, but you can have your custom sort installed. You can have a wildcard sort generated with Let's Encrypt for free, installed it on the server, and you'll have a completely fully protected valid URL, which browsers don't complain about, which is useful in some cases. It's actually required to do some testing. A really super cool feature, on-the-fly certificates with Let's Encrypt. This is not available yet, but it's in the works. I have a working POC of this. The way this works is that you don't have to care about certificates at all. When the request comes in, the Sandbox server is going to figure out the URL and just send the request to, or the domain, and send the request to Let's Encrypt to get a cert for that domain, do the validation behind the scenes through like a file, because Let's Encrypt is going to ping that URL looking for a specific string it tells you to put there. The validation happens behind the scenes, and provisioning happens behind the scenes. So while you are waiting for the URL to load, the cert is actually provisioned there, and you get it. You get it right away. Super cool. Basic HTTP authentication is built in. It has been for forever almost with Docksal. It's configured at the web container level, but the CI agent knows how to do this. So you basically have to provide two variables in your build environment settings, HTTP user, HTTP password, and you'll get basic HTTP authentication for your sandboxes. We're also working on an auth0 integration. It's a cool service with a free tier, which should be plenty. I think it's like 7,000 active users or so that you can use for free. So that will allow doing more advanced authentication through Google, GitHub, Office 360 may be premium, considered premium, but this will allow some auto authentication methods and single sign-on, which will be really cool. Visual tools. This is also one of my favorite things. So this is not something we built. We're just using a tool called Portainer. And Portainer is like web UI to your Docker server or cluster, and it shows you the stacks that you have running there. So in our case, it's going to be sandboxes, and then their containers. And what you can do, there are those tiny things that you probably don't see well, but logs, stats, logs, and then the console. So when your developers work with sandboxes, well, sometimes something will go wrong, and they need to be able to debug it. You, instead of giving them SSH access to the server, you can actually give them access to Portainer, and they will be able to fiddle around with their sandboxes, check the logs, log into the console of that container to just maybe run some drush commands or something else to figure out what's going on. This is probably the most powerful tool that we can include with sandboxes. A web IDE. Cloud9 is free. It's a really powerful web IDE, and Docksal has an integration with Cloud9. It takes just two commands, like switch the variable to enable it, and then run a command to update the stack. And it's going to reprovision one of the containers with the code base, including Cloud9 into the stack. So what you eventually are getting is a URL to the web IDE where you can edit the code base of your project. You can see syntax highlighting, everything is there. There is even a console, so you can log into your project through web and do drush commands or anything else you need to. Cloud9 also can do debugging, which is even greater. We still are figuring out how that should be wired up in Docksal, but eventually the potential of this is really huge. You can basically get cloud-based development environments for your team. They will no longer have to provision or install anything locally. You can provide them with environments, complete environments, not only like here's a URL for your feature branch, but here's also the IDE and console to that feature branch that you can do live development on, even maybe debugging on. So this enables super enhanced code reviews because you not only have the code, you not only have the actual running instance of your site, but you can now do something. If something is wrong, you can adjust some things and maybe figure out the solution and propose it in the pull request to your developer right away without having to, okay, well, it didn't work, now I have to still pull it down to my local and figure it out. Well, you may not have to. Other use cases like sprints, contrips, trainings. This can be the enablement for all of those. Cloud environments and dev environments in the clouds, and everything is just pre-provisioned there. Anyone familiar with Simply Test Me? Well, just a few folks here. So this is a site that allows you to test Drupal modules. You just select a version of the module and click provision, and it spins up you a working copy of Drupal installed with that module installed. So something like Simply Test Me on steroids will be doing the same thing, but will also allow you to perform development there and evaluate that module much deeper. Okay, live demo. So what I wanted to show you here is how the environment that is hibernating, how it's waking up. You actually saw that. So I will skip that because I'm running out of time. So let's open it up to questions. Okay, well, if you...
First, is the IP address of the Sandbox server permanent? Is it going to change with time?
The question is whether the IP address of the server is permanent. If you provision it with like click, it's going to be included in the stack. If the stack is removed, the IP address goes away. If you update the stack, the IP address stays with the stack, so it's not going away. But we do support permanent elastic IP addresses with AWS. So what you can do, you can pre-provision the IP address, and then when you provision the stack, you can tell it which IP address to use, so it's not going away. The same applies to the data disk, where your projects, builds, and Docker images and databases will be stored. So you can pre-provision the disk and then tell the stack which disk to use.
So if I push a branch, it creates some environments. If I push delete a branch, it destroys the environment.
The question is whether branches or environments for branches are automatically deleted. They are not right now. I know other tools are doing this. We could probably do this as well. It will require some more enhanced integration between the source control and sandboxes for the agents. The reason we don't really bother with that because our environments go to sleep in half an hour. At that point, it doesn't really matter if it's there or not. And in 7 days, it's going to automatically be wiped out. You had a question?
How do custom domains, like if we wanted to do like a subdomain to make sure that like our cookies work, because we do e-commerce stuff, so we need a subdomain of the main domain. So could we have that on the Sandbox environment?
Yes, definitely. Well, actually, no, I take that back. So there is a challenge with the way wildcard DNS records work, and you can only, when you provision a wildcard DNS record, it only applies to the kind of top level, but it's a single level. You cannot have like another level on top that will work.
Okay.
So what you do instead, you can actually no, that's for certs. If you want the SSL certs to work that way, they will not, because certs apply only to a specific
So you can test on
subdomain.
HTTP,
But for the actual domain names, yeah, wildcard record will cover any subdomain length that
So
you
we
want.
wouldn't necessarily be able to get a secure certificate, but
Yeah, not
normal
secure with
subdomain
multiple
will work.
levels of subdomains, but the actual subdomains will work. What we do instead, we are not doing subdomains of subdomains, but we are replacing dot with a hyphen. So it's a single domain, but it's kind of a composition of those subdomains or whatever. Like, if I go back here, we'll see that in this case here, Drupal 8 is the project name, and this feature CircleCl is the branch name. So I can add another level on top of that, which if I enable web ID, it's going to be ID hyphen feature branch hyphen project name. Okay, if you have more questions, let me know. I'm around today, and we're just on time. Thanks, everyone. This is where you can get more information about Docksal. And yeah, thank you for coming.